Okay, picture this. It's your birthday. Someone at work finds out and suddenly they're making a whole production of it. Balloons, a group rendition of Happy Birthday, maybe a sad little cake from the grocery store down the street. And you're standing there, smiling politely, deeply uncomfortable, counting down the seconds until it's over. Or maybe you're the person who didn't even mention it was your birthday. You woke up, made your coffee, went about your day, and when someone finally asked, "Hey, isn't today your birthday?" you just kind of shrugged and said, "Oh, yeah." If that's you, if birthdays just feel like Tuesdays, a lot of people in your life probably don't get it. They might call you cold or emotionally closed off, or they'll joke that you secretly hate fun. But here's what's actually going on under the surface, and I promise it's a lot more interesting than they're just boring. Because the way you relate to your own birthday, it's a surprisingly rich window into your psychology, and understanding it might just change the way you see yourself. Let's start with the most obvious question. Why do birthdays even feel like a big deal to most people in the first place? Psychologically speaking, birthdays are what researchers call temporal landmarks. They're these culturally designated moments that separate before from after, giving us permission to reflect, reset, and feel special. Studies on the fresh start effect, pioneered by researchers at Wharton, show that people are significantly more likely to pursue goals, make life changes, or engage in self-reflection around these landmark dates. New year, new month, new birthday. Your brain essentially uses these markers as psychological punctuation. So birthdays are built into most people's mental architecture as meaningful, which means that if your brain doesn't fire off those same fireworks, if the day arrives and it just feels like ambient noise, something specific is shaping that response. And it's not emptiness, it's usually the opposite. One of the most common psychological profiles behind this pattern is something called a low need for external validation. Now, that sounds clinical, so let me make it real. Some people build their sense of self from the inside out. Their self-worth isn't contingent on being seen, celebrated, or acknowledged by others. Psychologists sometimes call this a high internal locus of control, the deep, almost unconscious belief that your value doesn't live in other people's reactions to you. For these individuals, a birthday without fanfare isn't a loss. It's just neutral. The day doesn't need to announce itself. They already know who they are. And here's the beautiful irony in that. Society tends to read this kind of person as detached or even sad, but in many ways, they've accomplished something that years of therapy try to give people, a self-concept that doesn't require constant external reinforcement. They're not performing contentment. They genuinely don't need the applause. But there's another layer to this, and it's a little more complicated. For some people, the "it's just a day" attitude isn't born from security. It's born from protection. Think about a child who got excited about their birthday every year, who maybe planned for it, talked about it, hoped for something meaningful, and then the day came and went with disappointment. Maybe a parent forgot. Maybe the celebration felt hollow. Maybe the expectations never quite matched reality. After enough of those experiences, the brain does something incredibly clever and incredibly sad at the same time. It stops expecting. It preemptively flattens the emotions so there's nothing to lose. Psychologists call this a form of emotional self-regulation, and it's related to what attachment researchers describe as a dismissive avoidance style. You learn, often in childhood, that anticipating something wonderful is risky, so your nervous system adapts. It teaches you to downplay the thing before the thing can let you down. It's just a birthday becomes a kind of armor, not because you don't care, but because you've cared too much before, and it hurt. This is where it gets genuinely tender, because if you recognize yourself in that description, if somewhere under the shrug there's a quieter version of you that does wish someone would make it a little bit special, that's not weakness. That's just a human being who learned to protect themselves. And protection mechanisms, even the ones that outlive their usefulness, deserve compassion rather than criticism. There's also a fascinating philosophical dimension to this that I think gets overlooked.
Some people who minimize their birthdays aren't being emotionally avoidant at all. They're being almost stubbornly honest. Because when you really sit with it, what is a birthday existentially? It's the anniversary of an event you have zero memory of. You didn't choose to be born. You didn't choose the date. In many cultural traditions, particularly in parts of East Asia and among various Stoic philosophical traditions, placing enormous personal weight on one's birth date has historically been considered somewhat arbitrary. Marcus Aurelius didn't throw himself a party. The Stoics were pretty clear that the measure of a life isn't found in its celebrations, but in how it's lived day to day. People who think this way aren't cold, they're often deeply thoughtful. They've just decided that a random Thursday in whatever month they were born shouldn't carry more emotional weight than any other day they get to exist. And honestly, there's something almost quietly radical about that. Now, let's talk about one more psychological thread, because I think it's the most common one and the most misunderstood. High-functioning introverts and people with certain anxious attachment patterns often downplay their birthdays not because they don't want to feel special, but because they genuinely cannot bear being the center of attention. And there's a specific reason for that. When everyone's eyes are on you, when the cake comes out and the song starts, your nervous system has to do something very difficult. It has to receive. And for a lot of people, receiving, whether it's love, attention, or celebration, is genuinely harder than giving. It makes you visible in a way that feels exposed rather than warm. You don't know what to do with your face. You feel like you're supposed to perform gratitude and joy on cue, and the performance anxiety of that moment ruins the sweetness of it. So over time, you just start saying, "Don't make a fuss." It's not that you don't deserve it, it's that the spotlight feels less like warmth and more like a heat lamp.
Psychologically, this often connects to something called receiving vulnerability. The idea that letting people celebrate you requires you to believe, at least for a moment, that you are worth celebrating. And for people who carry quiet doubts about that, even a birthday party can become a complicated emotional minefield. So, what do you do with all of this? Well, here's the reframe I want to leave you with. Whether you're someone who downplays their birthday from a place of genuine self-sufficiency, or quiet protection, or philosophical conviction, or just plain social anxiety, none of those things make you broken. They make you a person with a specific interior life and a specific history. And understanding the why behind your patterns is not a small thing. It's actually the beginning of being able to choose differently if you ever want to. Because here's what I've come to believe. Treating your birthday like a normal day is completely valid. But if there's any part of you that does want to mark it, even quietly, even privately, you're allowed to do that for yourself. You don't need permission from a crowd. You don't need balloons or group songs. You could just make yourself a really good cup of coffee, sit somewhere you love, and acknowledge that you've made it another year through something as strange and difficult and occasionally wonderful as being alive. That counts. That more than counts. And maybe, just maybe, the people who treat their birthday like a normal day are actually teaching the rest of us something. That we don't need a designated occasion to feel seen. That showing up for yourself can be quiet. That worth doesn't need an audience. If any piece of this landed for you, if you recognized yourself or someone you love in any of these patterns, I'd genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. And if you're the type who doesn't usually comment, well, consider this your occasion.